We can
So you
start,
lead
Rob.
the way, Nippin.
Yeah, so yes, Rob, I think we've been talking about this for a very long time,
Yep.
the whole idea of a mandala. And I think
Yep.
this is a wonderful opportunity to meet up and discuss. And I can already see on the screen, although you're sharing it now, yes, the mandala symbolism.
Yep.
Would you talk us through this, Rob?
Well, just quickly, it was Carl Gustav Jung who really amplified mandala when he discovered the collective unconscious. So he found out by his research that mandala is shared across the world, and yet each culture that uses mandala has never ever contacted or spoken to each other. So Jung discovered that Eskimos and Australian Aborigines and Indians and people in the Pacific all use mandala, and yet at no time have they connected with each other. And so the concept of a universal myth and a universal language using the graphics of a mandala is something he discovered. And it in many ways, it helped prove to him the existence of a collective unconscious, of a shared unconscious between civilizations and cultures. And so, yeah, so the book is quite significant because until Jung kind of drew out the therapeutic and meditative reflective value of the mandala and its symbolism, it remained something which the ancient cultures knew was valuable, but never permeated Western culture. And it was really Jung who brought it into Western culture and amplified its meaning. So that's why I've got the book there. It's actually free and downloadable. You just put in, Mandala Symbolism in your browser and you'll get a free copy of that book. It's free and available online. So in Mandala Symbolism, Jung doesn't go too much into it, except if you just do a very, very simple search, most mandala research heads back and says, look, it's a Sanskrit word for circle, and they anchor it back to Tibet. And most people who talk about the mandala talk about this kind of mandala you can see a priest building in front of you. And that's a very, very common Tibetan mandala. But it's not actually true. If you go back in indigenous culture in Australia, they've been doing mandala for 65,000 years. And the mandala in Australian First Nations people culture, if you can see my mouse, represents the gathering of people around a campfire, which they dance at. And so the mandala represents a dance. The objects around outside represent various aspects. So a small arch is a younger person, a larger arch is an elder. And so each mark represents a part of a community, and the inside represents the fire and the ashes. So this mandala in indigenous culture is representative of community, understanding, dialectic, etc. So there's opposition in images, as you can see, reflective images, and the same over on this one. So indigenous people in Australia are doing mandala for much, much longer than those in Southeast Asia. But I don't really care. I don't want to debate where the origin is. In fact, in many ways, I think it's much better to leave it as a mysterious thing that has always been. And each culture throughout the world, particularly indigenous cultures, ancient cultures, have connected with mandala for thousands of years before Christianity ever connected with it. But if you look at the early history of Christianity, it started using mandala in about the 3rd or 4th century. And we might look at that in a minute. So before we go any further, I thought we might look at, and here's a Tibetan mandala, I thought we might look at the properties of a mandala. So it signifies a spiritual art and is anchored to Sanskrit. So the actual word mandala in Sanskrit text means disc or circle. So, for example, the Indigenous Australians didn't use the language or the word mandala, but it doesn't matter. What it shows is, and according to Jung, is it is a universal ritual symbol, and it is common to all civilizations and cultures for thousands of years. And in many ways, it shows that humanity at its very core, without text, so it predates text, it predates the inventing of the printing press, it predates many things, and yet way back to the start, even in Australian Indigenous culture, even if they didn't paint it on a wall, it's well known in Australian Indigenous culture that they drew mandala in sand as a way of communicating about the dialectic within a community. And so that's what this Tibetan mandala represents here. There's generally 2 axes, although there can be more. There's no rule about mandala, but often these mandala that have, so this one here's got like north, south, east, west. It's not really meant to be directional. It's meant to be balanced within the universe, balanced within the world of competing forces and competing energies. So it can be understood in various ways. Most people, I've put this in purple, most people who research mandala understand mandala as visual meditative, as a centering process. So the focus is often on the center where we draw together the extremities. It's also about balance, learning, and healing, and Jung certainly reflected those. From my perspective, you can't understand mandala unless you think semiotically. You can't bring engineering and mathematics to a mandala. It's not the way to understand a mandala. It's like trying to ask someone to understand what art is about by using a slide rule to help understanding. So it has to be understood semiotically. So you actually have to enter into a different way of knowing that's non-propositional, that's non-conceptual. And so at the very basic of a mandala is dialectical semiotic knowing and a form of graphic mapping, which is therapeutic, but also enriching in the way you visually connect with other people. From my perspective, my connection to mandala came through Jung, Allal, and the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber. So that's just a little bit of an outline of how mandala came into my consciousness. But recently, the three of us.
Yeah, just before you go, Rob.
Yeah.
Go back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
I know you've used the term dialectic a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
You've also used the word non-propositional, which you said is non-conceptual. It
Yes.
would be good if you can unpack those 2 terms for somebody who's new to it.
Okay. So propositional knowing and conceptual knowing in Western culture says if I want to understand something, I go to a dictionary. So if I want to know what a word means, I go to a dictionary or an encyclopedia and I get given the meaning of whatever that word is meant to mean. That's kind of propositional knowing. Experiential knowing is very, very different than that. For example, in Australian Indigenous culture, if you say to an Indigenous Australian, what is your culture about? They don't give you a proposition. They ask you to come and walk with them in their land, to sit around a campfire in their land and speak nothing. Sometimes Indigenous people will sit around a fire and say nothing for hours, but they'll simply be present with each other. But in Western culture, coming out of, the Enlightenment, we have this focus on text and argument, this Cartesian kind of binary way of trying to explain everything. If that's the way you come to mandala, you'll never understand it. If that's the way you come to culture, you'll never understand it. And so most people in risk and safety who love to talk about culture, mostly engineers, have absolutely no understanding of what culture's about because they try to define it propositionally. It's not the case. Now, when it comes to dialectic, if I I could maybe do this with a shape. I don't know if you can see. Can you see the little line I've drawn?
Yes.
Yeah.
I can use.
Oh, okay, you can. All right. So if I expand that line up and I make it bigger, right? So you can see it now.
Yes.
Okay. A dialectic is like the word dialogue, right? And you can see my line. Okay. A dialectic is the dialogue between the opposites on either pole. So if I put some text in there and I just call this A, right? I just call this A and I'll just make this bigger, right? If I call this A, you can see that now.
Yes.
Okay, there's A.
Yes.
The dialectic is between A and B, right? And everything between that is in tension. So the dialectic is about an energy of tension between one thing and another, finding balance and centering on where they join, what they join between. And in Western culture, we do that by hyphenating text. We put a hyphen between two things. But in mandala symbolism, it doesn't work like that. I take that away, that's that away. It's still understood as competing energies and competing forces between this part and this part, between this part and this part. And their wisdom is the meeting in the middle. So this is invisible, that I've only put it there to try and understand it. So that's what dialectic means. So does that help?
Yeah, wonderful, Rob. I think it's a very good example and something to talk about, maybe directly related to the risk and safety world, is that there is a lot between what is considered compliant and what is considered non-compliant. And we often miss the point that most of the life is lived in between those two.
Yeah, correct. And Martin Buber's book is called I, Thou, right?
That's right. Yes.
And there are three parts to I, Thou. There's the I, which is me, right? There's the thou, which is you, and there's the space between, which is the hyphen, which both joins us and separates us. And so there are three parts to that. That's no different, that dialectic, than the one above in the mandala. And so it was through Martin Buber that I discovered the power of dialectic, and through Jung. But the language of dialectic is really, I haven't found it, apart from my work, I've never found it anywhere in risk and safety. It's never mentioned.
Great. No, that's all very good, Rob. Please
okay,
keep going. Yes.
Now, if we go to India, it was quite interesting that in the place where the three of us stayed, there was a mandala made of flowers every day, and they had a ceremony every night. And I do have a photo of you and I, Pedro, lighting this here, but I just captured the women in the original dress and one of the serving people there with the flowers, just to make the point that this is considered mandala. It's considered so foundational in Indian culture, you would wonder why it was questioned. And when we went to a temple or whatever we went to, there were mandala on the roof, there was mandala on the walls, there was mandala on the floor, etc. So mandalas in Hinduism goes back 5,000 years to early India, pre-Hindu, pre-Buddhist discovery. And so there's various ways of explaining the mandala. This is from an academic who actually gave a definitional propositional understanding to mandala within health education of all things. And so used the idea of the mandala to explain that the centering part of a mandala was focused on body, mind, and spirit. And then as you circled outside to the mandala to family, community, and culture, there were other subsets of mandala. This kind of interpretation really suits quite well the Australian Indigenous understanding of mandala, but it doesn't necessarily suit others. All it does really do, and the reason why I put it up, is it does help you explain that there are levels of mandala which you can't see, which are unconscious. This person, this academic, has simply made them conscious, that's all. But if you go to mandala in different countries, so the United States Indians and Canadian Indians or Mexicans are represented there. You could go to body art. There's lots and lots of people who use mandala in body art. And again, it's about balance, it's about meditation, it's about therapy, etc. In the Christian tradition, they adopted mandala quite late. So this stuff is quite late compared to ancient mandala. There's a lot of mandala if you observe street art as well. And so there's just two examples of how artists are aware of street art. The funny thing is I've never seen anyone use mandala in the risk and safety industry in any way, shape or form, or even slightly intelligently. So that brings us to Jung himself. His first mandala he ever drew is this one here that you can see. That's in his book. And even then, Jung was exploring mandala. He drew many, many more in the Red Book, but I just put it up because it's his first one. He also explains archetypes by using mandala. And so he shows the competition or the tension between forces in personhood, between social and ego, between freedom and order, and how various archetypes or energies compete against each other. So there's no end to using archetypes for ways of understanding the world. I'll give you just a couple more. That's a Mexican. This is a Mexican one. There is no culture, ancient civilization in the world that did not have mandala, that did not. What actually happened when Western culture developed after the Enlightenment, we elevated rational logic text over the language of semiotics and mandala, and in fact devalued mandala and relegated mandala to some kind of hobby art activity, which is unfortunately where it is still remains. It's not recognized unless you study semiotics as a way of knowing. So I'll keep going until you interrupt. So when we get to the dialectic, I often use mandala in training in the social psychology of risk to help people map out the tensions and dialectics in their workplace. So for example, this is a mandala by someone that they did in training, showing the competing power of telling against the power of listening, of the power of compliance against the power of creativity, the power of trust against the power of control, and so on. So this person drew a mandala to recognize the tensions within their own life and the life they were living in risk and safety. A mandala can be simple like this, just very, very simple, just drawing out the tensions and the dialectics with the workplace. And we can see those things like creativity is opposed in force to the power to control, so on. This is another one. This was actually done by Brian Darlington, but he did a mandala using squares. It probably reflects more his personality. This one here was done by Frank in Calgary. He did this in a workshop with us in Canberra. This was a mandala drawn by Kiran Kumar, who did a study on ethics with us. And he's even labeled up here, stresses and tensions in the workplace. And he's got the organizational environment. And again, draw a mandala to show the dialectic between different forces competing with each other at work. Here's another one here. This obviously is a person who shows that mateship and camaraderie is in opposition to a force of hierarchy and power. The reason why I like this one, like discipline, following like sheep to core values like a light bulb, is this person is in the army. So they've used camouflage in the middle to signify their army life. but they've put some interesting icons around the outside. So I guess it's there is no rules for mandala. You can see this here. So, but if we go back to the start, it's a way of thinking. It's a way of meditating. It's a way of reflecting. It's a way of understanding beyond propositional knowing. So you don't think about mandala, you feel mandala. You don't think about mandala, you experience mandala. This is another one done by a fellow in Brazil who one day, you might even know this person, Pedro, but he put a triarchic mandala in the middle with environment, health and safety there. And then he's got some of the dynamics of health and safety here. And then he's got fear, unpredictability, uncertainty, and so on the outside. And I received this mandala yesterday from a safety person who mapped their swirling role into the way they see their work. I got another one the next day from someone who not just drew a mandala, they showed all their thinking that was behind this. So they drew the mandala first, and then they drew some concept mapping to show what the trade-off was and so on. And then we might finish with this one here, because I've been talking a lot, which is a mandala you did, Nippin, and perhaps I'll throw over to you to talk about this mandala.
Yes, sure. The thing I wanted to discuss was that there has been a lot of discussion around mental health and well-being, but nobody has really put it in the context. And when I think about, when I draw a mandala, when I feel a mandala, I drew this because of a couple of experiences recently in my life. One was I was particularly struck by an accident on a ship where a ship captain jumped overboard from the ship and he went missing. Yep. Why? Because there was an inspection due to happen on the ship, a safety inspection due to happen on the ship, and the company was pressurizing him that they don't want any non-conformities from the external auditing company. Yep. And the word they used was the ideology of zero. So and it was very disturbing to hear that this is the quest for safety, this is the quest for efficiency, this is a quest for reliability and certainty. And what is happening in the mandala is that the more you try to pull certainty and safety and reliability from different directions, you lose one very vital aspect of life, which is vitality, which is wellness. Yes. And I thought this mandala actually represents life going out of balance in the quest for certainty and control.
Yes.
And as I was drawing this, I experienced something else in life, which was a recent news about a head teacher in the UK who committed suicide. Why? Because the regulator had audited the school and categorized it as something like inadequate. So she couldn't take the pressure and the shame that came from the society, because she felt that at some level she as a head teacher has failed. There's been a lot of protest in the UK at the moment around her suicide. And I felt that a mandala like this really, really helps people visualize what we are doing in the outer world and how it is becoming so out of sync with the inner world. And the mandala gives us this opportunity to bring the inner world in sync with the outer world. So that's
very much so. No, that's a wonderful story. I'm just going to stop sharing that, and I'm just going to show you another one, because maybe Pedro can comment on this one. Remember, we were in Synergy Group last fortnight. Here we are. We're training with people in a completely different culture. We've got a Portuguese. We've got a person from Aberdeen, and we've got an Australian working with leaders of a large shipping company on how to tackle, I don't mean manage, I mean tackle, how to tackle the challenges in their life, in their executive, in their company. And here's Mohit in front of a mandala. Remember that, Pedro?
Yeah.
And what did you get? Because you'd not done this before, so I thought maybe you might like to comment, because I think the exercise was something you observed as working and yet you and I have never spoken about. So maybe you want to comment about what you thought this exercise did.
Well, my first surprise is how you used in the whole process of learning, in the whole journey of learning as a workshop, in the scheme of the workshop, how you use this so explicitly as part of that journey. And up until that moment, this had been something that was more of a symbol that sit in the back of the whole philosophy of Spohr.
Yeah.
And so the first very interesting thing was to see how you use this as a very explicit part of that journey. And it was fascinating to see how this brought to surface so many things that people were struggling with within their own journey.
Yep.
And I think this one from Mohit, I don't recall exactly. I think this was one of the largest groups, so there was a lot of people around the whiteboard here.
Yeah.
But which perhaps makes it even more interesting.
Yeah.
So the first thing that caught my attention here was obviously the center, where you have operational performance. And the driver of myself is performance. And how very closely in tension with that comes us and them. That I think is something that very rapidly surfaced in the very early minutes of the interactions we had and our engagement with them. That this is something that is very live in this organization. And so it was interesting to see how they semiotically brought that to the surface.
Yeah, and I even used the word surfacing. Remember that? I said that. I said, the more you do that, the more we're going to bring unconscious things to the surface. They didn't blink at that, you know. They didn't blink for a second. I think I have one more. I think I've got Mohit's group drawing another one or something with it. Can you see that one on the screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they were in the process of doing that. So that's the first steps of it.
Yeah, so that's the first step. But isn't it fantastic? Look at them. Here's this guy smiling. They're actually enjoying the process of surfacing the tensions in their workplace. Isn't that amazing?
Mind you, all of it was fun. All of it was playing.
You can't have fun doing study of safety, Nippin. You're not allowed to have fun. I mean, here's another one, another group, you know, and again, they drew a kind of a yin-yang tension person in the middle. And here they are, the tension between clarity in communication and ineffectiveness in communication. They got the concept of dialectic quicker than you would believe. You know, look at this, trust, balance against deficit of trust. And look, you know, cost is actually cost is in a dialectic against safety, you know, and so on it goes. Look at this, respect is against demeaning. And so just amazing stuff. I'll just
amazing because that. Yeah, it's amazing also at another level, Rob, that even before we went there, you were a little bit apprehensive about the quality of their English and all it comes on the surface, right?
I was, well, because, you know, I've actually gone to places where as an Australian, I speak in Europe and they ask for a translator, you know. So
Rob, that's not the point. The point is that those were words probably that were so buried in the unconscious that
it's like the language audit. They just come to the surface. Indeed. And we all get. I was surprised.
I was surprised. So it goes back to Wake's kind of idea that how do I know what I think until I see what I say?
Till I see what I do. That's right. That's right. Very, very powerful. Yeah. So look, that's all I wanted to show for the mandala at the moment in discussion. But I think maybe we need another session to talk about not just how we use it in the workshop, but I think how other people could use mandala in other ways of thinking in their organization. You know, like what I do with Wicked Problems, or what our Brazilian friends developed in Wicked Problems. Maybe we should save that for a second video.
Oh, absolutely. And just before we go, I just wanted to make one simple point here, was that, yes, there is a dialectic here in the mandala.
Yes.
And here's the center, which is, so the term mandala actually, you know, is, you touched upon it, but the meaning of mandal or mandala in Sanskrit is a circle. That's what it means. And so there are two circles here. One is the universe, the other one is the self.
Yes,
which is me. So how do I live in peace with the universe?
Yeah, that's right. You're dead right.
And it's so powerful the way you explain it, because there is no way you can be in balance with universe until you accept the opposites in life, until you accept living in harmony with the opposites in life. So most of the times what happens is that neurosis or psychosis or lack of well-being is the result of people becoming too extreme in their lives, about money, about power, about, you know, even about eating organic food, for example. You become obsessed with these things.
Or zero.
Yes,
look at
absolutely.
You look at the risk and safety world. The concept of zero is an extremist, fundamentalist position.
Indeed. So how can we? So it's a constant reminder to ourselves, semiotically, visually, that how can we live in peace with the universe? Because man has to be in peace with nature. And the trouble is that everything we do today is against the mother nature, is against the idea. So the mandala brings everything back into the center. And I think
that's right.
It's not only good for risk and safety, it's also good for well-being. It's such a powerful concept.
Yes, it is very powerful.
So I just wanted to thank you for educating us, because I would have never thought about it so beautifully, so graphically, as Pedro said, and use it in a workshop if we did not study this with you.
Well, but you know, I you know, remember in the workshop, and you said to me, I think you said, oh, and then we should do a mandala, and I'm thinking, oh, are they ready for it? Are they ready for it? It actually taught me that I had too many preconceived ideas about what they would do and what they would learn from it. And because we let go, I think we as presenters let go, the whole bunch of these, they just flourished. It was amazing to watch them flourish. And I think that was the value of it too, because I would not doubt you again. I think we probably could have even done Mandela on the end of the first day, not the second day.
Indeed.
So it was amazing to watch these people just absolutely flourish with this. Yes.
And Rob, just to finish off with one more thing, is that every time I've drawn a mandala with people, they need only a couple of sentences to get started. It's how intuitively it comes to people.
Yeah,
and
correct.
the other thing is that soon after drawing a mandala in a room, there is a sense of peace that you can feel with people, because they meet their opposite.
Yes, correct.
That puts them, there's so much more peace. And I don't have another word to describe this. It's just peace people experience with their own selves.
And again, you have to do it and experience it rather than try to conceptualize it and control it. And if you start to control a mandala rather than free and open conversation and mapping, you actually wreck it. You actually wreck what a mandala is. Yeah.
And then the IQ board behind you is nothing but a mandala, the quaternity of the mandala.
Well, next time we get together, we'll do the Wicked Problem mandala over it. And of course, what I love is, look what's in the center of the mandala.
One brain, three minds.
One brain, three minds. The human person at all three levels. So let's talk about that in another stage 2 of this video. Perhaps we should finish now, and we'll do a second one.
Yes, I think
do a second one soon.
Yeah, lovely to have this discussion. Pedro, is there anything you would like to say before we leave?
No, very happy with it.
Great. All right, I will stop the recording then. Okay.